So, good evening again, everybody, and welcome to the third edition of the Fintech Summer Sessions. We're very happy to have you here with us today for the first session out of 8 sessions, which are going to be very, very exciting. We have amazing speakers that are going to shed light on different topics in the fintech sector in general and touch on what's happening in the fintech sector in Saudi Arabia. Until everyone joins us, we still have people joining. Let me give you a bit of the housekeeping rules that you need to keep in mind. As you can see, you are not able to talk on this webinar. So all your questions can be addressed in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A button. Feel free to send any questions that you might have. And the FinTech team will be answering any questions we can. And towards the end of the session, we will have a dedicated Q&A session where we will be able to address any technical questions related to the topic at hand today. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the FinTech Summer Sessions. If you are a repeat attendee, thank you for coming for this third edition. For all of you, welcome to this community. We do have a huge community throughout the past 3 years. We've been able to put together a huge community. You're able to join that community through our dedicated Telegram group. Where do you find that? There's a button on the bottom of your screen that says resources. Not only will you see the Telegram group or the link to the Telegram group, but you will see all relevant links related to the FinTech Summer Sessions, as well as FinTech Saudi and FinTech Saudi's activities and previous sessions on our YouTube channel. You'll also see in the document portion of the resources, Q&As or frequently asked questions for you to look at and to read in case you have any questions that can be answered through the Q&A. As such, we're going to get started. It's 7:05. We want to be wary of time and make sure that we stay on time. Let me just tell you that in the past year, there's been significant developments in the fintech sector in Saudi Arabia. The sector is still booming. We are seeing fintech companies locally emerge and grow. We're also seeing many fintech companies from outside the country come in, set up operations here, and start operating here in Saudi Arabia. If you weren't with us last year, we were at 216 active fintechs. As of the end of 2024, we are at 261, and that number as of today has grown significantly. So hopefully we are able to entice you, encourage you to join us in developing a fintech in Saudi Arabia or joining a fintech in Saudi Arabia. And if you are a user, happy to encourage you to also become a user of fintech solutions in Saudi Arabia. Without further ado, we're going to get started with the first session of the FinTech Summer Sessions for 2025. We're super, super excited to have Chris Stevens with us. And I'm not going to talk too much about Chris. I'm going to let him do his intro. But Chris is a field CTO with Grok. Grok with a Q, not the one on X. Grok with a Q is a microchip manufacturer and manufactures LPUs specifically for AI. They had an amazing collaboration with the government of Saudi Arabia for over 1.5 billion to set one of the biggest data centers in the region. And they were able to do it in an extraordinary amount of time, 7 days or 8 days. I think the data center was up and running, and today Grok is operating in Saudi Arabia and has already started to acquire many customers in the fintech space. Chris is going to shed light on the use of AI in fintech and is gonna hopefully tell us a bit more about Grok and some of what Grok has been doing in that space. Chris, thank you so much for being with us here today. We really appreciate that, and we look forward to learning from you.
Kareem, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Salam alaikum, all my friends in Saudi and across the Middle East. Kareem, you mentioned the growing fintech community that Fintech Saudi is supporting. And as I'm watching the attendees, we're at nearly 2,000. This is absolutely amazing and humbling personally for me. I'll talk more about myself in a minute, but I spend a fair amount of my time in Saudi helping to build the business that we've launched with Aramco Digital and now Humane in Saudi. And the vibrancy of the AI community has been absolutely astounding to me personally and to all of us at Grok. The backstory of when we began to establish our partnership was we imagined that Grok in the Middle East, and I'll of course talk a lot more about what Grok is, but would be like a region of our cloud. And as soon as we launched and began serving tokens in February, the local community and the local demand was just absolutely overwhelming. So it's been just a wonderful, wonderful experience to spend my time personally, the team that we're building in Saudi and the rest of the executive team at Grok. It's been an absolutely wonderful experience. I don't need to tell the audience on the webinar here how welcoming and wonderful the people of Saudi are, but it's been absolutely wonderful and astounding for us to be a part of the community. So almost 2,000, that's absolutely amazing. Okay, let me share my screen and we're going to talk a little bit about AI and fintechs in Grok. Kareem, I'll ask you, you can see my screen well?
We see it. It's nice and clear. Do you want to just try and flip one slide to? Perfect. Everything's going well. Chris, I'll pass it over to you, and I'll be in the background listening attentively.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kareem. And thank you everyone for being here. Again, it's astounding and humbling to have nearly 2,000 of you, now it just says 2,000, to have nearly 2,000 of you join to learn a little bit more about the work that we're doing in Saudi, to learn a little bit more about AI and how we kind of look at the world. So let me first, the thing that Grok is most known for is really building fast. And we're going to talk about how Grok building fast will help you and enable the solutions that you're trying to build, that you're trying to bring to market, that you're trying to scale for your customers. But as Kareem mentioned, we also built fast in our partnership with Humane and Aramco Digital. It wasn't quite 8 days. It was more maybe about 50 days. But in my time that I've spent in Saudi, I've experienced firsthand a lot of the frustration that many of you probably feel and that others have felt in the lack of AI compute options and waiting for compute options to be delivered, whether they be from hyperscalers or other chip providers. So I understand the urgency and the need and the importance of building fast. And that's why, for us, for Grok, really, we're all about building fast. And it's both helping, again, you build your applications and your systems so they can be fast, but also delivering the kind of capabilities that we've delivered in Saudi and doing that very, very quickly. We had launched this service in Saudi in February. It took us about 50 days to ship our equipment into Saudi 747s. We had a team there on the ground setting up our data center in Dammam in the Eastern Province. We just announced a similar partnership in Canada, and we just announced another similar setup that we built in Helsinki in Finland in Europe. So if you're calling in from Europe, we also have brought compute to the European continent. And like I said, it took us about 50 days to launch our service in Saudi. We actually launched the service in Finland in about 30 days. So really demonstrating building fast. So just briefly, who am I? So I'm a VP here at Grok. I'm our CTO. And my background has been pretty mixed. I've done maybe all the things there are to do in the data and analytics space. I began my career as a data scientist. So like many of you, building models, solving problems for customers, solving problems for your business. I spent some time then running a global data science practice. So I've worked on many, many problems across many, many industries. And I always found that the fintech space or the financial services space tended to be the most advanced. There's a lot of complicated problems, a lot of data-rich problems. And so that was always a space that was very rich with use cases and rich with demand for the kind of work that I happen to be capable of doing. I also spent about a decade or so being a chief data officer. Most recently, I was the chief data officer of Geico Insurance, so I live in the United States. I happen to live in Pittsburgh in the United States, which allows me also to be on the faculty at Carnegie Mellon. At Carnegie Mellon, I teach a number of courses across data and AI in a bunch of different varieties. I'm also a father of five, so my children tend to keep me busy, although they're mostly grown up at this point. And in my free time, I try to play the guitar, but I'm not terribly good at it. So anyways, enough about me. Let's talk about Grok. So first, I want to talk about what we're doing in Saudi and some of the lessons that we personally here at Grok have learned in the time that we spent in Saudi. You know, our relationship in Saudi really began about a year ago. His Excellency El Swaha is a good friend of one of our executives here at Grok. His name is Mohsen Mozami. They used to work together at Cisco many, many years ago. And His Excellency was visiting California and asked Mohsen if there was a company that he should come and visit. And Mohsen recommended that he come to see Grok. And things have just sort of unfolded for us in such a blessed way with the work that we're doing in Saudi. You know, we were sponsored in by His Excellency, and we formed a relationship with Tariq and Amin and the team at Aramco Digital, now Humane. And it's really just been growing and flourishing from there. But again, as I said at the beginning, the thing that has really been astounding to us at Grok is the innovation and work that is happening on the ground by teams like yours and the demand that represents for this kind of service that Grok provides. It's really been a wonderful, wonderful experience. So first, I want to point out, you know, us at Grok, when we establish partnerships, when we come into a market like in Saudi Arabia, we really go all in. The person that you can see wearing his thobe here in the red square, this is actually Jonathan Ross, our founder and CEO. And you can see we were having a cultural event and dinner with some of our friends and sponsors from Aramco Digital. And I put this picture here. You'll all recognize this, I'm sure, as the Prosperity 7 well. And, you know, my first week at Grok, actually, before I even worked at Grok, I came to Saudi to be with the Grok team. And what was really impressed upon us with the Aramco teams and the Aramco Digital teams was the importance of delivery and the importance of on-time delivery. And in fact, it is my understanding that in Aramco's history, they have never missed a delivery. And so that was impressed upon us very clearly. And the Grok team has worked very hard to try to meet that level of expectation and delivery. And again, we were able to do so in a very short period of time. We began serving live tokens into MOM at the very beginning of February, right before the LEAP conference where Jonathan and I happened to have opportunities to speak. Many of you were probably there. We also like to highlight our partners. So this is a good friend of mine, Sejong, who is part of the Humane team. He's building an application that has been rebranded to be called Humane OS. And it's sort of an operating system that uses agentic AI to make your day-to-day life at work a lot easier. And so Sejong and I at LEAP in February presented on the work that we are doing at Grok, presented on the work that he is doing building this application as a part of Humane. And you can see in the background here again highlighted this $1.5 billion continued investment in the relationship that we have with Grok. And we're just so humbled and so proud to be a part of what's happening in Saudi. We also like to do things together. This is actually a webinar that we held with Kareem and team at Fintech Saudi in person. We were doing some design thinking through use cases together. On stage is Hatija. She's our head of developer relations. I'd love to connect you to her. She loves to build community and work with teams like yours to train on how to use Grok, get comfortable with all the things that make Grok special. We're more than happy to come and meet with any of your teams, do deep dives into your architectures, deep dives into the problems that you're trying to solve, develop use cases together and help you map those to the value that you might create working with Grok. This team on the bottom left happens to be part of the Alam team, formerly from Sadaya, now a part of Humane AI. So this is Dr. Yasser's team and others. And the Alam models run on Grok today. We're very proud to be running the Alam models on Grok. And so this is a couple of Grok engineers and a couple of engineers from Sadaya Humane working on Alam together in another similar workshop session that we did. I think this was back in May. And then, like I said, we like to put in the time. Here's some of my local team. This gentleman, Cal, without the hair, is local. He's been in Saudi since he started in December. This is Hatija, again, our head of developer relations, and this is a gentleman named Gunjan, who's one of the solution architects on my team. But it's important for us to spend time in the community. It's important for us to spend time building relationships with teams like yours. Since this picture was taken, this is about as big as our team was at the time. We've grown the team. There's about 15 people now that we have local in Saudi, almost all of them in Riyadh, across partners and account executives, HR and local finance. And then, of course, I have a number of folks on my team that are solution architect, forward deployed type engineers that can really help get into the technical aspects with you. And then, the work that we're doing in Saudi, of course, is providing AI compute, AI inference, technology and infrastructure to support the work that your teams are doing. But it's really more than that for us. The partnership now that we have with Humane involves a lot of other things outside of providing, AI inference in Saudi. We are developing the world's fastest and best inference at scale in Saudi. The ambition is for that to not only be the largest in the Middle East and largest in the region, but one of the largest in the world. And I think the work that we're doing together with Humane will certainly get us to that ambition. The service that we have available in Dammam today is capable of on the order of 4 million tokens per second or so, depending on the model that we're using. So that's a pretty significant amount of capacity that's available. This is, of course, the largest AI compute center in Saudi Arabia. People tend to immediately think of large language models when they begin to think about generative AI, but we also have multimodal models running in Grok. We have vision models, we have speech to text and text to speech. We've worked with the Sadaya team, for example, on their SauTech model. We also have all of the latest versions, really the state-of-the-art versions of global LLMs running. So Grok is a Llama launch partner. So every time there's a new Llama model available, that model is available on Grok the same day that it launches. I call out DeepSeek here. When DeepSeek launched in January, DeepSeek was running on Grok that very same day. We're also very well aligned to Vision 2030 and the ambitions of the kingdom more broadly. And this, again, starts with our sponsorship and relationship with His Excellency El Swaha to bring AI compute to the forefront of the Saudi economy and to make AI and AI tokens the next great export from Saudi Arabia into the rest of the world. I mentioned Hatija a few times, who runs our developer relations team. We're really committed also to building community and supporting innovation across the Middle East, starting in Saudi. So I would encourage, as a follow-up, you could reach out, I'm sure, to Lena and Kareem and connect with the Grok team. We'd love to do hackathons together. We'd love to do developer events. We'd love to come and see your teams and support the work that your teams are doing. This next one, this regional headquarters and local hiring in Saudi, this is really a representation of the commitment that Grok has to not just building a business in Saudi, but also building a relationship from the government through His Excellency down through Humane, but with all of the rest of you. So we've established a regional headquarters. We have hired local HR, legal, and finance support. We're building a local team. We have a gentleman, Fahad Al-Tarif, many of you may know. He was at Oracle for a number of years. He's now running Saudi in the Middle East for Grok, and he's, again, building a significant size team to support all the work and development and demand that we see across the kingdom. We're working together across different sectors also to build co-development centers and AI training centers. Again, we had a session a couple of weeks ago with Tuwaiq Academy, building content for AI to be delivered in Saudi. And of course, this gives you access to the world's fastest inference for the startup ecosystem that many of you are a part of. Okay, so I've talked about inference a couple of times, so let's stop and talk about why I keep saying inference. So first, Grok's focus is on low latency, high throughput inference. And it's important that we start with that distinction because most of the work that will be done in AI, Gen AI and other dimensions of AI, will be done in inference. Inference being the time where the model is running and the model is being used to solve problems, as opposed to the training cycle. And many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that. But Grok is a system of technology that is purpose-built for inference workloads. We think that's important because that's where most of you are going to be spending your time. You know, this graphic that I have on the screen happens to be from Menlo Ventures. They're a prominent venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. And if you believe their data, well over 90% of the compute that will be spent by AI adopters into the future will be spent in inference. So if you imagine, even if you're building your own models from scratch, that certainly takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of compute. But then every single time that model is interacted with by your teams and by your customers, those are all inference cycles. So it's really important to ground ourselves on Grok is a system purpose-built for running AI or inference. It's also worth noting that Menlo Ventures has this point of view about the majority of AI compute being in inference. They're not the only ones. There's a link down here that we can share back out to you that Accenture did some research and they've basically come to the same conclusion. The other thing is this market is really just getting started. You know, this bottom of these two charts is the amount of time it took for the internet, here in the blue line, or generative AI to be adopted by 90% of people, and this is outside of North America. It took the internet about 20 years, 23 years to be precise, to reach 90% adoption across the world. It's taken ChatGPT as a proxy for generative AI only about 3 years. So you probably see this in your businesses. Hopefully you see this in the demand for the services that you're building. But we're really on a rocket ship here. This chart in the back is ChatGPT user growth. And if we take that again as a proxy for adoption and consumption of generative AI services, you can see we're really in exponential growth mode. And I'm sure and hopefully you all experience that in your businesses. The reason that that low latency inference is so important is because the types of use cases that you're building can't tolerate 1 second, 2 second, God forbid, longer 5, 10-second wait times. If you're having a multi-agentic AI solution, each one of those agents can't take 1 or 2 seconds to come to a conclusion to interact with another agent. Similar with copilots, conversational AI, real-time customization, data analytics, all these use cases demand instant intelligence. So, sub-second, millisecond inference is important if you're going to have a reasonable customer experience supporting any of these kinds of use cases. Just expanding on that, there certainly are use cases where you could do the work in batch, and maybe these would be appropriate for a GPU type compute infrastructure, doing some offline document analysis, translating documents in batch and so forth. But the vast majority of value that will be created for you and your businesses are happening over in this left-hand side in orange. And this is where really real-time inference and the LPU from Grok is going to be necessary. All these copilots, fraud prevention, voice assistants, and all these different things that I'm sure many of your teams are working on. And again, we'd love to connect with you and your teams as a follow-up to understand some of the work you're doing and how Grok might help there. This is some research that I took from a company called Iconic. They're another venture capital firm. They just published a report, really comprehensive about kind of the state of AI right now. So I pulled a couple of facts out of that I thought were interesting. The first is, where are people building? So if you think about the work that you're doing and where are you building and how are you consuming your AI infrastructure for both training and inference? And you can see the vast majority of teams are either fully cloud-based or they're using external AI API providers. And that's really where Grok fits in. So Grok is a cloud-based solution. Again, it is housed in Saudi Arabia, so your compute stays in the kingdom. Your data never leaves the kingdom. And you access the power of Grok through a simple API call. Also, how are people building? The real takeaway here is that a lot of teams are moving to open source models. It's natural that most people started by building on OpenAI. They were really the first mover in the market. In fact, they woke us all up to the fact that all of this capability was possible through large language models. But as teams have begun to consume and they've begun to launch applications, they tend to run into economic scaling problems or inference problems that create for a poor customer experience. And so customers are beginning to move towards open source models. Grok hosts all of the state-of-the-art open source models today. And also thinking about beginning to optimize for inference efficiency. So it's time that we're moving from pilots into production use cases, and that's when the speed and cost advantages, throughput advantages that Grok can provide become important. Also in Saudi, of course, it's important that your workload, your data, all remain inside of the kingdom for data sovereignty and compute sovereignty reasons. And that's why it's important to think about Grok as an option for the inference that you're building in your applications. And then lastly, what are people working on anyways? How are they thinking about building these systems? And what we see here is the vast majority of teams are beginning to build agentic workflows. What type of AI products are you building was the question here. And many teams, 79% of the more advanced companies and even 62% of the sort of AI enabled companies are building agentic systems. So then when you think about building an agentic system, the latency becomes even more important because it's not just one call to an LLM and one response that comes back. You may have dozens of agents, and each of those agents are then interacting with other agents. So the output token from one agent becomes an input token to another, and so on and so on. And that latency begins to compound. And so as you think about the customer experience for high latency on a single call, imagine now you have dozens of calls. As you begin to think about the economics and how they scale for a single call to an LLM, now in your agentic workflow, you may have dozens of calls. So it's important to consider options like Grok for that low latency, the higher throughput, and the significant cost advantage as those applications that you're building to begin to scale. Okay, then I want to shift gears. I want to just do a brief overview and talk a little bit about agents, specifically MCP, the Model Context Protocol pattern, and Google's agent-to-agent framework that they built. I just want to talk about what these things are, the job that they perform for your organizations. Many of you are probably building agents today. Many of you are probably using MCP and A to A from Google. So I want to talk about a little bit about that and then show you a little bit about how that works on Grok. So the first thing is that MCP is really your sort of butler to standardize the communication between all the services and LLMs that you want to build into your application. So it standardizes the communication across those services and agents. It structures the communication across those agents, and it manages the tools and makes those tools available to your LLM so it understands which tool it might want to call for a particular application. The agent-to-agent framework from Google is something slightly different. There's a little bit of overlap, but this is more about enabling inter-agent communication. It has this concept called an agent card, which allows for capability discovery so that your agent framework, A to A, or even your MCP server can sort of call out to discover new services. So as you're building new agentic services, you register them into your A to A framework and they become discoverable by all of the other agents that are working across your system. Also supports task management and can do things like UX negotiation. So is this the right tool to use at this time? Or maybe there's another tool that I want to use instead. And they really play complementary roles, right? Like I said, the MCP is really the standardization and framework for how all of these services will communicate with one another. A good analogy is probably HTTP on the internet. When we began to standardize on HTTP as the protocol for communicating across the internet, suddenly the internet boomed and became a lot easier to use. The communication protocols were standardized, and MCP becomes a step in that direction for agentic AI systems. And then A to A is used for managing, allowing for discovery of those agent-to-agent interactions. So really together, these two things, MCP and A to A, enable a broad collaborative AI ecosystem of agents working against your use cases. They do have complementary goals, but there are some overlaps. You just have to be careful as you contemplate when to use which for what. And I would also encourage you to continue to stay on top of how the innovation is unfolding over time, because it is still very early in this market. I mentioned that I teach at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm developing a course for next fall, so really 12 months from now, about AI platforms and AI operations. And it's likely that the content that I will teach a year from now will be drastically different than the patterns and systems that people are using today. So MCP is making its way towards a standard. A2A is making its way toward a standard. But I would continue to encourage you as users, as builders, folks that are building both businesses and applications on top of some of these frameworks, just to stay on top of not only how do these two things overlap, but is one becoming the standard over the other? Are there other patterns that are coming along? And Grok will always be here staying on also on top of the state of the art and happy to help you as you have questions through these things. The industry implications are improved interoperability. If you think about APIs as a standard, now software systems can all communicate in a standard way. Or I mentioned HTTP, it allowed the internet to communicate in a standard way. So now the agents that you're building can interoperate with agents that perhaps a sister company of yours or another fintech is building. So now you can communicate across a standard interface with MCP. Standard interfaces also reduce dev time. You can adopt the standards that are being used across your community. These things are open source, so you can count on rapid development, but also the standardization and patterns that open source software tends to provide. And you'll allow for it begins to emerge as a potentially unified AI interaction framework so that agents in your systems can communicate easily with agents in other systems, in other organizations. In the fintech space, you could imagine standardizing on MCP maybe across financial services. So now how do payments work and fund transfers and fraud and anti-money laundering and all the other problems that you probably are working on in the fintech space? Having a unified interaction framework will allow that interchange of information and interchange of agentic action on AI to happen in a standardized and seamless way. And of course, in the financial services space, we'll look for some regulation probably to take place to make sure that those interactions are being done in a safe way. And a framework like MCP or A2A is a possible candidate to land as that interaction framework. So where you wind up is I'm not going to go through this entire diagram. We can send this information to you. We have a system where these two things work together. You have this MCP host, and its job is to understand where other maybe local data sources are, or this MCP agent is able to search the internet and access information from the internet. So each of these MCP clients has a particular function to perform, whereas the protocol between them that A2A provides allows for the things you see here: secure collaboration, task management, again, negotiating for UX and capability discovery. So these things have a place in a way that they fit together rather seamlessly. This happens to be it's relatively simplified, but this happens to be an example of an MCP architecture that is running in Grok. So each module becomes its own MCP server. The functionality of each one of these modules are exposed as tools. So if this agent needs to access emojis for whatever reason, access selfies, standard text, maybe they're going to call Spotify, you can just imagine all the ... all the different kinds of services and tools that you might want to build into your agentic messenger. Each one of these becomes a tool and a service that's callable and manageable across, and they're standardized in how they communicate by way of MCP. And then A2A manages the connection between them so they can communicate with one another in a seamless way and can, again, be discoverable. As you build new services, new MCP tools or agents, they become discoverable to one another through MCP and A2A. This is a flow diagram that you can imagine how a end user would kind of flow across. Again, similar diagram, but similar system, but different kind of approach to how you'd look at it. So the end user sends an initial request through MCP tools. The MCP tools do some discovery to find which is the right tool to use. The LLM processes the feedback from that. Maybe it goes to execute another tool, right, to resolve the final conclusion. And along the way, it's calling Grok services, hitting the Grok MCP client, and running with LLMs and using LLMs that run on Grok. And all along the way, you can imagine this becomes a very compound, relatively complex workflow. So along the way, this takes advantage of the low latency in Grok to not allow all these complex additional LLM calls to add to your overall latency. By running on Grok and taking advantage of that low latency, you're going to have an overall system latency that continues to be very low. So some examples of how you might leverage ADA and MCP, and I'm sure many of you are building companies in this space or already solving problems in this space, so you know the fintech space better than I do. But the automation of financial operations. If you think about what like RPA did for process automation, the potential with agentic systems through MCP and ADA is to replace entirely those ERP systems and replace entirely those systems that maybe have been automated through something like RPA, but replace them entirely with agents that do that work for you, that are tirelessly looking for fraud or anti-money laundering across the systems that they're charged with monitoring. Again, some things to keep in mind. You want to make sure you're choosing the right protocol to your system needs. You don't want to over-engineer, right? Maybe you need a handful of agents. So make sure you're building the right MCP framework over them so they can communicate and be discoverable to each other, but you don't want to overdo it, right? Like I said at the beginning, consider current frameworks and tools that are available now that have been hardened and tested maybe by the open source community, but definitely keep an eye on protocol updates and support. For example, I had mentioned that a good analogy for MCP is HTTP. So HTTP, as many of you know, allowed for standardized communication across the internet. However, it wasn't until HTTPS was developed where you could have secure transfer of information across the internet, which allowed for many of the problems that you all solve today. Payments over the internet, online banking over the internet, general finance in any capacity being done over the internet, took the development of HTTPS as a standard on top of HTTP. So I would imagine in the MCP space, using that as the analogy, there will be continued development towards what is the standard set of security protocols that allow for not just the transfer of information between agents in a standard way, but also the secure transfer of information between agents in a standard way. There's a lot of development happening in this space. So these ultimately will help advance agentic communication. So definitely if this is not something you're using today, I would absolutely consider and encourage you to do so. Their adoption will shape how integration paths develop over time. And you want to make sure you're evaluating and adapting, to reach their full benefit. This isn't something that just out of the box, you're going to immediately receive the benefit. You want to make sure you do your proper due diligence and really understand the problem space. Kareem, I see you've appeared on my screen. Do we want to take another minute or two and then we can stop for some questions? Okay, great. So I want to go back to Grok then. So I talked about Grok as Grok Cloud. You can access Grok through our API. But really, Grok is composed of three primary parts. Most people know Grok for the LPU. This is the custom chip that we bring to market. This chip is designed and fabricated, manufactured in North America. So we are not dependent on any supply chain in Southeast Asia and in Taiwan. So that removes a lot of potential geopolitical risk for Grok's supply chain. We control that supply chain ourselves, all done so in North America. The Grok compiler is sort of the brain that operates the whole system. And actually, when Jonathan left Google, our founder, Jonathan, was a part of the team that invented the TPU when he worked at Google. He left Google and he felt that the software layer of AI inference had not been solved. You had to spend time working in kernels on GPUs and working in CUDA and things like this that were barriers to innovation and adoption. And so Jonathan designed first this compiler, which is a special piece of software that optimizes model execution across our chipset. So the compiler and the LPU working together is really the special sauce, the magic that allows Grok to both be so fast and accessible consumes significantly less energy than other options, and accessible to teams like yours in terms of cost. Those two pieces are working together make for the core engine that is how Grok is able to be so low latency, so high throughput, and so low cost. On top of that, then we've wrapped that in a cloud. I don't need to explain to all of you what clouds are, but this is where you get your load balancing, you get your serverless API access, so you don't need to understand the complexity of the system. You access the system through our API. And this is where you do authentication and service management and all the other things that you might expect a cloud to do. One thought on your data. So the thing with Grok is we don't store any data whatsoever, full stop. The weights of the models are stored in Grok. When your query comes in, your request comes into Grok, it is processed on the order of milliseconds, sent back to you as a response, and nothing is maintained in Grok whatsoever. So there is no data stored in Grok, full stop of any kind, period. We are GDPR compliant, we're SOC 2, ISO 27001, all the things that you might expect. We've worked with CST and the regulatory agencies in Saudi, as you might imagine. So really the only data that exists in Grok is just basic metadata about this query happened, maybe for billing, these kinds of things. But all of your data stays as your data. If you want to learn more, I would encourage you to go to trust.grok.com. I mentioned some of these things along the way, but why might this be important to you as a user? As you think about scaling your application, what does it cost to serve a single user in the applications that you're building? And what will it cost to serve 1 million users when your application scales the way that you hope it to? How do those economics eventually break your model? And how do you then take advantage of lower cost, much more affordable options like Grok to scale the economics of compute inside of your application? This notion of accelerated time to value really gets at all of the things necessary to load and operate and manage and monitor and update LLMs on a system like Grok. We take all that work off your hands. So all you have to do is build your core application, the innovation that you're bringing to market, and all of the work of managing models, staying up to date with the state of the art is all handled by Grok. And then the risk mitigation, performance degradation, latency spikes, operational instability, all of these things are handled by Grok, again, in a way that you would imagine a cloud similarly handles compute. The thing about Grok that is important to a lot of customers is it is significantly less expensive, much more economically efficient. The energy consumption is significantly lower than systems based on GPUs. This is a comparison that we had done for, imagine you're building a sovereign AI system to serve 50 million people. So that's around the size of Saudi, a little bit bigger than Saudi, but there's significant savings across cost, CapEx, OpEx, and then on the energy consumption side. And then the last thing I just want to kind of close with is Grok is really more than just models that run on fast inference. We have all kinds of other capabilities available: JSON mode, tool calling, function calling. We have speculative decoding available. You can do LoRa swapping on Grok now. So if you're building custom LoRas for your models and for your systems, you can load the LoRa weights into Grok and they will be dynamically used when you call your model. I mentioned multimodal models, so text to speech and speech to text vision models. We're partnering with Alam, the Alam team from Humane. I mentioned that earlier. So there's a lot of other capabilities that are available on Grok as a system, more so than just the state-of-the-art models and just high throughput, low latency compute. And we're staying on top of those things and moving forward. We're continuing to stay up with the latest state-of-the-art models. Continue to add new functionality. If you come to Grok today, you could choose the region as Middle East Central. That's our region in Saudi, and we have dozens and dozens and dozens of models that run on Grok today, and there'll be more coming. Custom weights, bring your own models, all these kind of things are coming to Grok today. And so the way to get started, let me just jump to that, is if you come to console.grok.com, you can sign up for an API, an account and an API key for free today, right now, and get started immediately. There's also a chat interface where you can interact with Grok directly, choosing the model of your choice. So I know, Kareem, you want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to stop there. Let me stop sharing my screen. And I think we can open questions.
Chris, thank you so much for the session. Although it was very inspirational, it was very technical, and I see a lot of questions coming in with relation to the technicalities of things. I got plenty of people who enjoyed the session fully, but are asking for real life examples if you can share. For example, earlier on you mentioned one of the fintechs in Saudi Arabia, I don't want to mention their name, that are using Grok today. Can you give a tangible example so our audience can relate to that and see how fintechs are utilizing Grok and AI in general today to better serve their customers and or have more efficient operations?
Sure. We have a couple of customers around the world, including one in Saudi and a couple of customers doing similar problems. And the fascinating problem that they're solving to me is imagine you're managing a large portfolio or you're in the portfolio analysis space. And what they've done is they built a comprehensive agentic platform that does all the aspects of portfolio analysis such that an executive can literally have a conversation, like by way of voice, have a conversation with their portfolio, right? Imagine that, you want to ask questions about, there's tariff uncertainty in the global economy today, combined with geopolitical events that create even further uncertainty. We've seen impact on like commodities markets based on geopolitical events and so on. Just imagine all these scenarios that could impact the direction of your portfolio. And again, we have a customer in Saudi. We have a couple customers in Europe and in the United States that are doing sort of similar things. And they allow for a voice-enabled conversation literally with your portfolio. And the problem they solve is generally solved today by an army of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of analysts, some of whom's job is to do numerical analysis of market movements. Some of their jobs is to do, qualitative analysis of market segments and understand the commodities market and the factors that drive that and so on and so on and so on. And the audience probably understands the problem better than I do. And generally,
That's it.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
right, you'd have hundreds of people working across this problem space, and all that information sort of coalesced into, a consumable manner for an executive. And now they have agents that are doing all of these, the research. Other agents that do the combination and scenario building. So you can just ask, well, what would happen if tariffs, went to 50% between the United States and Brazil? This is something announced recently in the news. What does that do to our portfolio? What might that do to the commodities aspect of our portfolio and so on? So you can imagine these agents doing all of this work across research and scenario building. We've also seen a number doing agentic work in anti-money laundering and fraud. As this audience would well know, those are not only massive data problems themselves, they're also very sparse data problems, hopefully, meaning there's not a lot of fraud and money laundering that's taking place. So the ability to very rapidly model across both transactional data, which is done today with traditional machine learning models, but then bringing in all these other data sources, many of them text, they could be other formats. They could be call center recordings or voice that indicate potential fraud, and connecting all of those data sources together and doing so very quickly with the intelligence and synthesis that an LLM might bring to place allows for a very rapid, again, almost conversational interface with potential fraud or money laundering that might be happening in your space.
That's interesting, and that answers a couple of questions that we got, because we got a question asking how it can be used for robo advisories, and I guess here again, the computation of data and accumulation of multiple sources of data using the different language models also plays a role in that. Same with the question related to real estate and investment. You touched on assets, asset management and asset companies and how they're using that as well.
I mean,
We did get a question here related to, did you want to say something before I move on to the
I was
next
just gonna,
question?
yeah, I was just going to say that you're absolutely right, Kareem. And the thing about, say, real estate and asset management and research is these are by nature text-based information sources. So classic machine learning, I grew up as a data scientist, classic machine learning operated very well on numerical data sources. Systems today can consume lots and lots and lots of time series numerical data and do wonderful things there. But to do asset class research, whether you're in real estate or other, commodities I mentioned a couple of times, the research there is largely text-based. I mentioned that I was the chief data officer at Geico Insurance. Geico literally had decades of claims adjuster reports, damage reports from vehicles, medical reports from accidents, and all these text-based sources of information that now large language models can reason over them practically instantaneously on Grok, synthesize them, combine them with others, right, and bring forward a much more synthesized sort of strategic point of view for an executive team to consume.
I have a more technical question here for you, Chris. Muhammad is asking us whether agent-to-agent communication enhances multi-agent collaboration in AI systems, and what are the key challenges in ensuring reliability, scalability, and alignment of goals among autonomous agents?
Yes, that's another webinar that we should do right there. But the short answer is yes. And again, the attempt that A to A or MCP are making in the world is we need standardization. Like right now, there's literally no standardization. So this is again the internet in 1985. And the internet wasn't able to really boom until HTTP became the standard for communication packets across the entire internet. And so MCP and A to A are making different attempts at part of that problem so that not only can your agents communicate with your own agents, but then your agents can communicate with another agent. Maybe again, if you're in the fintech space, you might be serving banks and investment portfolio managements or in insurance, and you want your agents to be able to communicate with their agents as well. So having a protocol that allows you to do that communication is incredibly important. Kareem, you had questions about scaling, about autonomous agents and safety. And we have an example of a customer that uses multiple LLMs in their application architecture. And then they have one specific LLM, happens to be LLM actually. They have one specific LLM that they use for alignment and sort of guardrails and safety as the agentic communications are eventually going to be exposed to a user. They want to make sure that they're not exposing things that as a brand they don't want to expose, or exposing things that would be inappropriate or maybe just flat wrong. So then they're using another LLM as the guardrail. And again, that gets at the point of why is low latency so important? Now I've just added another LLM call into my system for the purpose of safety and guardrail. So I need that latency also to be very low.
Chris, I have a question specifically directed towards Grok and its ability to support full Arabic LLMs. Can you elaborate on that maybe a bit?
Sure. Yeah, like I mentioned, we have Alam running on Grok today. Alam, of course, was developed by Sadaya in Saudi over the last few years. We also have a partnership with Cohere. So I understand Command A, that's the model we have running on Grok. That model is I understand, strong in Arabic. So we have that model running on Grok as well. And then we have some other multilingual models that also run on Grok. But if there are other specific models that either folks in this audience have developed themselves or are aware of that we don't have on Grok, we can certainly run them on Grok. There's really no barrier to running any model on Grok.
And yeah, for fintechs that are earlier stage, they would be able to jump on Grok and start building models just as easy as any scale up would.
Absolutely. You go to console.grok.com. I can show you right now. So if you go to console.grok.com, let me share my screen again. So if you go to console.grok.com, you can see Kareem, my screen again.
Yeah.
You can see here I'm on our playground. I can choose the models, the region that I want. US, this is the Middle East, so this is Dammam. Or in Europe, this is the thing we just announced in Helsinki. And then these are all the models that we have available on Grok. There's many, 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 many models. And then you just come here and Oops. Sign up for an API key. Really that simple.
And that's where you mentioned tokens earlier on. One person was asking what you meant by tokens. The tokens is the actual number, the API calls that you use, correct? Can you?
Yeah, that's right. So tokens are sort of the currency of AI compute. You can imagine that when you send in, you send in a question to an LLM. We've all used ChatGPT, I'm sure, and you ask it, I'm heading to Amman, Jordan this weekend. I want to spend some time with my family. What are some good restaurants? What are some, cultural sites that I want to see? What are some good ways to relax? All that text gets broken up by the model into tokens. They're not exactly words. So sometimes they're a collection of words, sometimes they're parts of words. It just sort of depends. But you can imagine that text that goes into the model gets broken up into these units called tokens. Those are fed into the model. It reasons over them in what practically feels like magic, even to those of us that work in the space. And then out of the model come more tokens, which are words or word bits. And the model knows how to order them together into an answer to tell you the places that you might want to visit when you're in Amman, for example, in my example.
Just a couple more, Chris. Obviously, the audience is engaged with us, so please bear with me. With the high adoption of AI today, everyone jumping on, using it, integrating it into their solutions, how are security measures being sort of keeping up with the adoption of AI, and what is Grok doing specifically with regards to those security measures and security requirements?
Sure. As I mentioned, as relates to security, first and foremost, there's no data on Grok. I mentioned this earlier in the session. So cybersecurity teams that we work with tend to immediately get not totally comfortable, tend to get pretty comfortable when we go through that discussion that there is absolutely no data that is stored and maintained in Grok whatsoever. You have a prompt that you send in that is processed through Grok and sent back, and that's it, right? So your data persists and lives in Grok for a matter of milliseconds. So then you get into other layers of security that are represented again by our ISO certification, by SOC 2 certification, and GDPR. In the United States, we have this regulation HIPAA, which is really meant to control for the use of private personal health data. Grok is HIPAA compliant. So then there's all these controls around the Grok system itself that allow for the safe use of data. And when you look at your own systems and you're building all these agents, it's definitely a very serious consideration for how you prevent, DDoS and other attacks from coming into the surface that you're building, because that attack surface sort of gets bigger the more agents that you have. Grok is committed to ensuring that your data is not used and managed in any way on Grok, that it's safe for the milliseconds that it lives on Grok. But outside of that, like I said, I gave some guardrail examples, how we're trying to make sure that there's safety in place as well. And another just interesting side note on cybersecurity, there's an active startup community building LLMs for cybersecurity. Imagine all the data that would be necessary to really understand the nature of an attack, using LLMs, like I sort of described in Fintech, for cybersecurity as well.
Great. Chris, this was great. One last question for all our audience here, technical and non-technical. Some are advanced, some are less advanced. What resources do you recommend for us to learn more about the AI, what's happening on AI and in AI every day, and AI and fintech specifically?
Sure. I happen to love the work that Andrew Ng does, publishing videos, continuously learning and learning tracks on staying up with the latest in AI. It can definitely be overwhelming. And then lastly, we got a big team in Saudi. Reach out to Grok.
Amazing. We did have a couple of requests from some universities, and I will take you up on that, that are interested to invite you to their AI clubs. So we'll make sure that we do that, Chris. And for our audience here, some of you were asking whether we will be sharing those slides. Yes, we will be sharing them on the Telegram channel. Uh, I want to first start by thanking Chris, but don't leave yet because I got a couple of things for you before you leave the session for today. So, Chris, thank you so much for your time and thank you for the information and the insights. If you want to share with Lena any sources or links that we can share on the Telegram group so people can learn about AI and fintech, AI in fintech, please do so. And again, we are really humbled by your presence today and happy to have you for us for the launch of the FinTech Summer Sessions 2025. For our amazing audience, thank you for attending this first session. I see a lot of operational questions coming in terms of